Hello everyone, welcome to our Gutsy homestay. I'm Wei'er.
I'm Josh.
And today we're going to be making a very easy vegetable ferment, and that is...
Sauerkraut.
So we've got our cabbage here today.
A nice organic drumhead cabbage. Sauerkraut is probably the most well-known, probably the most simple vegetable ferment that you can make. It involves, at its most basic, is two ingredients, and that is, of course, cabbage, and salt is the other ingredient. And salt's a very important ingredient because salt inhibits the growth of pathogenic bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, whereas it enables the multiplication and fermentation of the beneficial bacteria like Lactobacillus and Pediococcus and Leuconostoc, all the good guys that we want inside our gut. You can see that Wei'er here is slicing the cabbage nice and thinly. And we want to slice the cabbage nice and thinly so that we can give easy access for the bacteria that live on the outside of the cabbage. We want to give them easy access to the carbohydrates that make up the cabbage. We're all about wild fermentation. Wild fermentation is just that process where we allow the bacteria that already exist naturally on and in and around the cabbage. We want them to multiply and propagate, feeding on the carbohydrates that make up the cabbage. That's much better and much more effective and much more tasty than adding a culture starter to your cabbage. We don't really want to add a culture starter because most of the culture starters you might add to the cabbage, be it milk whey or a probiotic capsule or a special proprietary blend of probiotics, if you add them to the cabbage, the natural food for most of those bacteria is not cabbage, and so it's going to die off pretty quickly. Whereas if you just allow the existing bacteria that already love and live on cabbage to multiply and propagate, it's going to feed and ferment happily for a long time, for many months. It'll ferment for very, very many months. Also, as the cabbage ferments wildly, there are about 3 different distinct stages of fermentation. And as the cabbage starts to ferment, the bacteria start to take over, the bacteria produce lactic acid as a byproduct of fermentation, and that makes the whole mix a bit more acidic. And as it gets more acidic, a different group of bacteria take over and start to propagate and create even more acid as a byproduct. And then as it gets to a certain acidic point, a third group of bacteria take over and ferment even further and create the whole sauerkraut mix more acidic again. So you get 3 distinct groups of bacteria fermenting over a period of time, and we find that period of time is best at about 3 weeks minimum. 3 weeks is where the bacteria really ramp up, and then it sort of continues ramping up for another 2 to 3 weeks. And then after that 5 to 6 week period, the bacteria sort of plateau in their fermentation. They still keep increasing slowly, but it's quite a slow process from that point on. So 3 to 6 weeks, the highest number of probiotics and the best flavour as well.
Having said that, 3 to 6 weeks in more of a temperature-controlled environment.
It does depend on temperature. Temperature's a big factor when considering fermentation. The hotter it is, to a point, the faster it'll ferment.
Yeah, because we're based in Brisbane, so we're sort of subtropical. That means that in summertime, we find that it's not as ideal to ferment sauerkraut in a home kitchen. Back at Gutsy, we actually do ferment all our sauerkraut in a temperature-controlled environment, so we are able to control the temperature, allow it to be able to slowly ferment over a period of 3 to 6 weeks. Whereas if you're at home, if you have got a house that's constantly air-conditioned at about 19 to 25 degrees Celsius, that's pretty ideal.
It's a good temperature to ferment sauerkraut in. The hot summer 30 plus degree days, it'll ferment pretty quickly and you get lots of bacteria. The flavour's not quite so, it's a bit more rough, not quite so smooth and gentle. So you've sliced up about...
I think this will be about 2 kilos.
Eyeball it.
I'm just gonna wait.
Because the reason that's important is that we have a 2 litre jar that we're going to ferment in. And if you weigh the veggies you're going to put in there first and get it to a little less than 2 kilos, you know it's going to be pretty close to fit inside a 2 litre jar. The vessel you ferment in when you're fermenting veggies is quite important. We don't want to ferment in plastic. Plastic's not ideal because as the sauerkraut gets more acidic, the acid from the sauerkraut can leach flavour and chemicals from the plastic. You can use different things like a high quality stainless steel or a ceramic crock, but we find that for home fermentation, glass is the best. One, because it doesn't leach flavour or colour or chemicals into the veggies it's fermenting, and two, you can see what's going on. You can see straight through and see how your fermentation is progressing. As Wei'er keeps cutting up, I'm going to add salt. We talked about the importance of salt. The rule of thumb when adding salt to vegetable fermentation is 1 tablespoon per kilo. So we're going to end up with 2 kilos. There's the first tablespoon.
A bit more stuff.
There's the second tablespoon. Yeah. Give or take, if you got a little bit more or a tiny bit less, it depends a lot on what you enjoy. Because if you add more salt, it'll mean, yes, perhaps a few less strains of bacteria will ferment in that extra salty environment, but the cabbage will be extra crispy because, of course, the salt also maintains the structure of the cabbage so that it doesn't putrefy and it doesn't soften. If you add a little less salt, it obviously won't taste as salty and you might get a few extra strains of bacteria propagating, but you also are at higher risk of putrefaction. So what I'm doing now is twisting and squeezing and trying to release the juices from the cabbage and mix in the salt thoroughly. And it's pretty important that you, as much as you possibly can, break down the structure, release the juices and mix in the salt. What also helps is if you have a pounder, and there are different types of pounders. This pounder is not the best one because it has a curved bottom. We often like to use some a different design pounder with a flat bottom, which is much more effective. But
well, we've got one that's designed especially for us, made by a tanner that's based locally. So he was able to make one that's just really perfect for pounding the cabbage and also packing the cabbage or sauerkraut into the jar itself.
By pounding it, this is what I was talking about. Break down the structure of the cabbage a little bit more, release the juices, and mix in the salt as well. Later on I can use the pounder to pack the glass jar nice and tightly, which is also quite important. So I want to keep on pounding and mixing and squeezing until I can pick up a handful and squeeze it and see juice coming out. And it's not quite there yet, so I'm going to keep on mixing.
You'll find that during some seasons, some cabbages would be a lot juicier compared to other seasons. So this season's cabbage might be I think it's a
pretty
touch drier. Yeah.
This year?
Yeah. So if you really can't be bothered with, massaging it, just leave it for 30 minutes.
The salt once you've mixed the salt in, because the salt will help draw out the juices. But there's also a benefit to breaking down the structure a little bit to give, this allows more thorough fermentation, so the bacteria on the outside can feed in the carbohydrates on the inside. And as you work it, you can feel it getting more juicy. It's a little bit closer.
See that it's...
As I squeeze now, a little bit of juice comes out. So we're pretty close. It wouldn't hurt to work it just a little bit more.
You want to get the consistency of a cabbage that looks like it's been cooked. It's really a lot more. You can see juice coming out. You can feel underneath your fingers that it's more of a cooked texture. Not soft, but just, it doesn't look like freshly chopped cabbage anymore.
A proper pounder with a flat bottom makes that process much easier and much faster as well. Okay, so we've got our cabbage, our salted cabbage. At this point, we could easily load the cabbage into the jar and let it ferment and be good to go. But it's also at this point we can add other different things to make it a little bit more interesting.
Yep.
You got anything else to add to the sauerkraut here today, Wei'er?
So I've grated carrots early on. Put in some carrots, and I might put in some citrus. That's in season at the moment.
Wild cabbage is a very good vegetable to ferment because it maintains its nice crispy crunch. It's got a nice dense structure and maintains a good texture and good crunch all throughout fermentation. You can ferment any vegetable and any fruit, in fact, that you want. And we've fermented lots of different fruits and vegetables over the years. We regularly ferment beetroot and carrot and cauliflower. We've fermented broccoli, we've fermented tomatoes, we've fermented turnips, we've fermented potatoes. Anything you can ferment. Some works out better, some doesn't work out so well, but they all produce bacteria, and through the process of fermentation, the fermentation makes whatever veggies that you're fermenting, whatever fruits you're fermenting, it makes their nutrients, their vitamins and other nutrients more bioavailable, and also helps to break down the structure of the veggie a little bit so that it's easier for us to digest without picking up a lot of the toxins that every vegetable does contain. And it's interesting, you might have heard of the carnivore diet, and the carnivore diet is pretty popular, there's a niche that are really promoting carnivore diet at the moment. One of the reasons for the promotion of the carnivore diet is because every single vegetable contains toxins which in high enough quantities can potentially cause damage to our body. The interesting thing is, though, that fermentation breaks down all those toxins, leaving you with a highly probiotic, very beneficial vegetable.
So basically what we added as extras are grated carrot, ginger, and orange.
Alright, I'm going to mix that in. Doesn't need too much mixing at this point. It's already nice and juicy. Just want to mix that salt in nice and thoroughly, and then we can pack it into our fermentation vessel. The glass jar we already talked about.
Glass jar.
I want to try and pack these veggies in as tightly as I can. Many people just ferment their sauerkraut for a few days. It's easy to ferment your sauerkraut for just a few days because mold generally doesn't grow in 3, 4, 5 days. The biggest problem that we've had people talk to us about in terms of their sauerkraut going bad is mold growth, and mold growth is a pretty big factor. Some people say that, oh look, you get mold growing on top, just scoop it and scoop the mold off and you'll be good to go. The problem with that is that mold spores are heavier than water, and so if mold is growing on top, even if you do scoop the mold from the top of the vegetable fermentation, the mold spores will sink down and permeate the whole mixture. It's not ideal. There is a way to inhibit mold growth, and that is if you ferment in an anaerobic environment, most molds won't grow without free access to oxygen. Good pounder makes your life much easier. Unfortunately, we didn't bring a good pounder with us today. But I really want to pack those veggies in there as tightly as possible. Let the veggie juices come up, and the veggie juices are coming up as Wei'er pushes down.
Works if you have got a small fist.
Or a good pounder.
Oh, good pounder, that's right.
We want to have a little bit of an air gap on top. Now, Wei'er's saved us some cabbage
Leaves?
which we can stick on top. We want to pack it down and submerge the veggies under their own juices as much as possible, because the juice is where it's nice and salty and briny, and it keeps the veggies from putrefying. Look at all that juice. We've added no water to this, and all that juice is coming up beautifully. If any veggies do pop up through the brine, they might get a bit soft and yucky. We want to try and keep it below the brine as much as possible. An easy way to keep as much of the veggies below the brine as we can is by using a weight.
Maybe we should put another leaf in.
Another leaf. If you've got some spare cabbage leaves, we'll whack them on top, pack them down. That helps to keep all the other stuff that you do want to eat below the brine. And if you do, in the end, have to pull these outer cabbage leaves off and chuck them away, that's fine. But if they're good and tasty, you can eat them as well, if they're not too soft or brown. So every veggie that we've fermented, you can usually get enough juice out of it to submerge the whole mixture in its own brine. This glass weight helps to hold everything down. And I was talking just before about minimizing mold growth. You can ferment in an airtight jar, that can sometimes work okay. But sometimes the carbon dioxide that's generated as a byproduct of fermentation can build up so much pressure that either the jar cracks or when you take the lid off, everything fizzes up everywhere. So we could put the lid on just like that. But on a commercial scale, we ferment with airlocks, which allow the carbon dioxide to escape out as it's fermenting without letting fresh air in. And that really means mold can't generally grow in those environments. We've found the best way to do that at home is with these little one-piece silicone airlocks. You can get fancy 3, 4, 5-piece airlocks which don't allow oxygen in, but they're dirty and hard to clean and break. This thing's pretty simple. It's one piece, has a little nipple on the front, which as the pressure builds up, it allows the gas to escape without letting fresh air in. And that just screws into these nice wide mouth jars. And there you have it.